think that members of the U.S. administration actually think that that could be the case going forward, especially considering the fact that Iran...
Here we go, here we go, here we go. It has happened. U.S. strikes Iran. It's going to be a lot of backlash for what just happened, guys. But I think it's a good thing that that happened because they have been threatening America forever. So, and they were really, really close. Probably just about have completed those nuclear weapon programs. And, you know, at any given second, they could attack whenever they get ready. So sit back, you know, let me know what you think about it. And we're gonna rock this show tonight.
We appreciate you being with us here on Al Jazeera. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, let's recap. Here's what we know so far. U.S. President Donald Trump has posted on his social media site, Truth Social, announcing the U.S. has conducted strikes against 3 nuclear sites in Iran. Trump says a full payload of bombs was dropped on Fordo and that Natanz and Isfahan were also hit. All U.S. planes are now outside of Iran airspace. Islamic Republic of Iran state media says the 3 nuclear sites bombed by the United States had personnel evacuated some time ago. Trump says the attacks must force Iran to, quote, agree to end this war. The president has called the strikes historic and is expected to address the nation at the top of the hour. Let's go back now to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. She's live for us in Washington, D.C. Kimberly, we are seeing reports emerge that the U.S. President Donald Trump spoke to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the past couple of hours. Have we heard any more from the White House with regard to details on that conversation?
The U.S. president is the one that often takes the lead on messaging, and the White House is allowing him to do that. We expect that the first indication we'll get about that phone call may be from the president himself when he delivers that address at the top of the hour. Now, in the meantime, I can tell you that the congressional reaction is starting to come in with regard to the president's Truth Social posting. Not surprisingly, one of the more hawkish Republicans, Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been advocating for this, is now applauding the U.S. president, responding and posting to the president's announcement that there had been a completion of the successful attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran. Lindsey Graham writing, "Good, this was the right call. The regime deserves it. Well done, Mr. President." But we should tell you, other Republicans like Thomas Massey, a congressional Republican, not the same way. In fact, he is saying that this is not constitutional. And here on Al Jazeera, we have been talking about the division of powers between the executive branch, the White House, and the legislative branch, the U.S. Congress. That only Congress can declare war. So we will have to hear from the U.S. president about whether or not he believes this was constitutional, and if so, why. Now, we also have reaction from the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, and he writes, "The regime in Iran, which has committed itself to bringing death to America and wiping Israel off the map, has rejected all diplomatic pathways to peace. The mullah's misguided pursuit of nuclear weapons must be stopped as we take action tonight to ensure a nuclear weapon." And I apologize, I took a screenshot and don't have the rest, but I know that it is up on your screen.
Breaking news, breaking news.
So I didn't know that it carried on, but obviously there he is articulating.
We did have a guy in the comment section.
He is articulating that the reason for this is that he believes that there was a U.S. interest, and as a result, that is what we expect we are going to hear from the U.S. president. I'm picking it up here. He goes, "As we take action tonight to ensure a nuclear weapon remains out of reach for Iran, I stand with President Trump and pray for the American troops and personnel in harm's way." So Senator John Thune bringing up 2 very important points there. He knows now that as an astute follower of the Constitution and also of international law and the rules of war, that the United States has taken a strike against a strategic asset of Iran. Iran now, as a sovereign nation, is within its full rights
Ever
under
since I
international
was a
law
youngster.
to retaliate. And
A lot
that's
of
why
people don't
he is
know that.
referring to pray for the American troops and personnel in harm's
So,
way,
yes.
because Iran laid out very clearly just prior to these strikes that, in fact, that the United States, should it join with Israel,
not gonna even
would
work.
become a potential target, would become vulnerable, and could face retaliation. We
Yeah,
also
hold
know
on,
that
guys. I
in
gotta
this
go get some.
post from Senator John Thune, the Senate Republican Majority Leader, that he has talked about in here that they have rejected all diplomatic pathways. And that is a really important point, because what we know is that the U.S. president said that he wanted to give 2 weeks, or would make a decision within 2 weeks, for there to be a potential for Iran to make an unconditional surrender. And that is what he was looking for, complete and unconditional surrender. But what appears to have happened, according to some of the sources, U.S. officials I've talked to, is that the U.S. president, when he discovered that there was no breakthrough in Geneva between the Iranian representative and the top diplomats from Europe, and that Iran had not given that complete and unconditional surrender, that is when he decided to act with force. The White House press secretary saying very quickly that the president's first choice will always be peace, but he is not afraid to use force, something that he has done in just the last few hours.
All right, Kimberly Halkett, thanks so much for bringing us up to speed. Stay with us. We'll be coming back to you shortly. Hamda Salhout's joining us now live from Jordan's capital, Amman. Hamda, I'm told that we're now seeing a statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What more do we know?
Shit.
That's right. We do have this statement from the Israeli prime minister, just posted moments ago online through the government press office, in which Netanyahu is thanking President Trump for his actions, saying that the United States has surpassed any nation in the world, and that they denied, quote, the most dangerous regime, the most dangerous weapons, going on to say that the United States and Israel often say peace through strength, meaning that first comes strength, then comes peace, applauding the U.S.'s move to conduct these airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, specifically the Fordow site, that Israel was not able to attack itself because it did not have the munitions required to reach this facility that was so far deep underground. Netanyahu going on to say that Israel has achieved a lot in their airstrikes against Iran. No mention, of course, of the hundreds of people who have been killed and all of the destruction that has taken place as a result of these Israeli attacks. But make no mistake, this is something that the Israelis had wanted since they had started their attacks on Iran 10 days ago. There were private conversations happening behind the scenes that the Israelis were frustrated with that.
All right, let's go to some breaking news. Here's Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with a statement. Let's listen in.
But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
All right, let's go back to our correspondent, Hamda Salhout, who's live for us in Amman, in Jordan. Hamda, sorry we had to interrupt you there, but there was a video statement from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in which he thanked U.S. President Donald Trump. What else did we hear from Mr. Netanyahu?
Had the same enemies. So
Well, Netanyahu touting the
Iran,
peace through strength policy, saying that first comes strength,
Laden
then comes
and
peace, going on to say that the Americans had achieved something that no other country had the capabilities to achieve, saying that it was a brave decision, essentially, for the Americans to attack these nuclear sites. But it's important to remember that the Israelis had wanted this from the very beginning. They wanted the Americans to get involved because Israel did not have the weapons capabilities to strike the Fordo nuclear facility because it is so far underground. Only the Americans have those types of military capabilities, and that is for the entire world. That America was the only country with the weapons Israel needed for their continued attacks on Iran. Netanyahu also said that Israel has made great achievements in their airstrikes against Iran, but no mention, of course, of the hundreds of people who've been killed and the damage to apartments and other houses and property and structures inside of Iran. But this statement was expected from the Israeli Prime Minister, praising this decision by the Americans that he had waited 10 days for.
All right, that's our correspondent Hamda Sahut live for us in Amman, Jordan. Thanks, Hamda. We should mention that U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to address the nation at the top of the hour in about 5 minutes from now. We just heard a video statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's go now to our guest, Harlan Ullman. He's a political and military analyst. He's chairman of the Killowen Group and a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council. He joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Harlan, thanks so much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. Let me ask you from your perch there in Washington, D.C., the fact that there's been so much speculation in the last few days as to whether the U.S. would enter the fray. Now we know that they've attacked those 3 nuclear sites in Iran. Where does that leave things regionally?
Because what if we pass it up?
To think that 30 cruise missiles and 6 bunker busters are going to change Iran's viewpoint and lead to an unconditional surrender, I think, is naive.
If somebody tell you death to America, death to your family, death to whoever, you better take them out whenever you can. Believe them when they say that.
Surrender. And I really wonder whether Iran would be so stupid as to leave those targets vulnerable and not move for important radioactive material elsewhere. We will see. I'm also skeptical whether those bombs will create the damage that has been touted so far.
See, America made that mistake last time.
We'll wait to see about the bomb damage assessment. But look, I'm afraid this is the beginning of a longer conflict. Iran has lots of opportunities to wreak havoc in the region. It could attack Bahrain, the American naval station there, could close the Suez Canal through the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. I think that the White House and certainly a number of Republicans are touting this as a supreme victory. I think I'd wait a couple of days to see how this really ends up. But I really doubt this is going to bring Iran to the negotiating table. It might have quite the opposite effect.
Trump did a great
Harlan,
job.
from your perspective, do you think that there are members of the administration that actually believe right now that this could end things when it comes to Iran surrendering conditionally? Because Trump has also posted on his Truth Social account in the last hour saying that Trump must agree to, that Iran must agree to end the war now.
Not the civilians.
You have to realize that the grand old party, the Republican Party, is Trump's old party. And even though you have a large number of Republicans who see America first means to not get into endless wars, whatever Trump wants, his associates are going to pick up the banner and say that's terrific, with very, very few exceptions. And so I'm afraid that the White House, as it is doing with tariffs and many other things, immigration, is living in a very closed environment. It does not accept reality for what it is. I'm afraid this could prove to be a dangerous calculation.
So yes, they were buddy-buddy.
But I really doubt that 30 Tomahawk missiles and 6 bunker busters, no matter how powerful, are going to cause a nation like Iran.
They started it all.
Harlan, in the lead up to all of this, we had these extraordinary scenes playing out in the past few days in the U.S. in which you had a sitting U.S. President, Donald Trump, rebuking the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, because she had testified a few months ago that Iran was not seeking to make a nuclear weapon. I mean, the fact that happened, and now you have this happening, what does that say to you about the state of the U.S. government?
Nothing. I think Tulsi Gabbard is an idiot, and she's never should have been Director of National Intelligence. And I would not believe anything she says because I don't think she's competent. Having said that, the president is going to act. He's got the Director of Central Intelligence and Defense Intelligence Agency at the Department of Defense.
Even though
there are a few people who know what they're doing. The issue is who sat around that table with the president. Here are the secondary and tertiary consequences of what could happen and leading to an unconditional surrender, it seems to us, is the least likely. So
take out
forget
those
Tulsi Gabbard.
facilities.
She and a number
Because
of cabinet
why?
members are
Because they were this
really not confident
close
to hold their jobs,
to finish
including
it.
the Secretary of Defense. But that does not mean America does not have a competent
Those
military.
nukes
The
that they've
question
been
is,
working on
Donald Trump does not need
for over
advisors.
30
He
years.
believes he's the smartest person in the world.
A lot
and
of
whatever
people
he
don't
thinks
know
turns
this.
out to be correct.
But
and
they've
he's
been
here.
working
So
on these
I wouldn't
nukes
put much stake in what the Director of National
for over
Intelligence
30
said.
years.
This all rests with Donald Trump.
Harlan, what do you think the level of
And they
concern
were
is
this
amongst
close
White House officials right now when it comes to
finishing the
the
deal.
peril that Americans may
Look at
face
those
in
sites,
the Middle
bro.
East based on
Look at those
how
sites.
Iran has said that they would retaliate
They are
against
underground.
U.S. assets if
You know
the
how
U.S.
long it
were to
takes
attack Iran?
to make something like that?
The White House lives in a bubble. If you go back to August 1964, after the Tonkin Gulf incident, in which the Americans launched Lyndon Johnson.
They've been working on this before I was born.
North Vietnam.
I'm
America
50
really
years
thought
old.
this was going to do
You think if
a
we
lot of
went to
damage to
war
North
with
Vietnam
other
and would
countries,
teach
we
them a
would stand a
lesson?
chance?
Well, the lesson it taught them was get engaged in a war with the United States that they would win and we would lose. I'm not suggesting this is the equivalent, but I think there's a lot
We
of
wouldn't have no
speculation
choice
in
but
the
to
White
stand a
House that
chance.
is wishful thinking.
That's just like
There need to
this.
be some hard-headed people
If
that
somebody
say,
is threatening
this is
my
what could
family,
go
bro,
wrong. Remember what happened in
been threatening to try
2003
to
with the
kill
Iraqi weapons of mass
not just
destruction that
me,
weren't there.
but my
Remember
mama,
what
my
happened in
daddy, my
Afghanistan.
kids, and my
And I'm afraid
grandkids.
that
I
using
don't.
American
Guess
force
what?
without
I don't care
thinking
what
through
happens
the
next.
consequences and considering
I'm
what
gonna
happens
take
next
I'm gonna take
has
you
led to our
out,
downfall.
and I'm
at
gonna
least
I'm not
3
even
wars.
worried about
I
what's
hope
gonna
that's not
happen
the case
next.
now, but I'm reminded by
I'm
history.
gonna come in a
and
position
often
of
history
strength.
repeats itself.
I'm not
In this
gonna come in a
particular case,
position of
this
fear.
administration,
I'm not
I
gonna
don't
worry
think that
about
they've done enough thinking
your
about
retaliation.
about
I'm not
secondary
worried about
consequences,
who's
which
gonna
could be
help you.
severe. I hope I'm wrong.
I'm
but
worried
right
about
now,
taking you
despite
out,
the
and whatever
euphoria of
happens,
attacking
happens.
Iran,
That's why you
I
gotta
don't
stay
think this is
ready.
the end of the day.
From
It may be
getting
the
ready.
beginning of the end.
So yes,
beginning, but I
be
think
ready.
there's a lot more at stake here.
All right,
We ready.
Harlan Ullman, thanks for joining us on Al Jazeera. We appreciate
ready.
getting your perspective.
If not,
Let's go back
guess
now to
what?
our White House
At
correspondent,
least we
Kimberly
went out
Hockett,
with a
joining us
fight. We
live
went
from
out
Washington, D.C. So,
with a
Kimberly,
fight.
we are expecting at any minute
Because if
a
somebody
statement,
threatening your
a live
family,
address
bro,
from U.S.
are you
President
gonna
Donald
stand
Trump to the
down and
nation.
stand by?
Do we have any more details
and
from
you
the White
know
House about what
that
we're
somebody
expecting
want to
Trump
kill
to
your
say?
family. You know somebody want to kill not only you,
Yeah, we've
but
just
your,
learned that the
your
U.S.
mama, your
president
daddy,
is
your
likely
kids,
to
your
say in
grandkids.
his upcoming address that the United States
So you
is
gonna
not
worry,
currently planning
you gonna
any
worry
additional
about
strikes.
what
This
they gonna
is
do in
according to
return?
two U.S. officials. Now,
No,
what
I'm not
we know
worried about what
is,
you gonna do in
I have a little
return.
visitor here. What we know is that
I'm gonna take care of
in
my
addition
business
to that, he
and
is
stand 10
also going
toes
to
down.
tell
Whatever
the
happens,
American people
that's
that
what's
this
gonna
was an
happen.
amazing success, and
That's
that
like when,
now the Iranians should
Kimberly,
make
I'm
All right,
sorry
you
to
go
interrupt you,
Trump.
This is the
but Donald
Look,
Trump
he look like
is
Obama. He look
approaching
like
the podium.
Obama. Oh, bro, come on, really?
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision
Oh,
strikes
bro.
on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight. and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill.
Right. That's how you do
Most
it.
of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes.
That's how
There's
you
no
do
military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, let's go back now to Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent, to talk us through what we just heard from U.S. President Donald Trump, who addressed the nation live about those U.S. strikes on the 3 nuclear facilities in Iran. Kimberly, we heard President Trump say that the U.S. objective was destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat. What else did we hear from the president?
I'm going to break it down. We got some questions.
Yeah, we heard that we heard what we believe is the U.S. president's justification for taking action. And I don't think it's going to sit well with a lot of his critics as well as a lot of his supporters, given the fact that he did not anywhere say that the United States was under imminent threat, which would have made this legal under the U.S. Constitution. Instead, the U.S. president laying out the reasoning for taking these strikes was that he saw that the United States, or rather that Iran was the bully of the Middle East, and that they have been chanting death to America. But
somebody gonna come kick your door in with them choppers,
mean the United States was
and they outside. What you gonna do?
He also said that a lot of people died as a result of Iran's hate. Again, not specifying those were Americans.
Go to the front line
and
protect your wife, your family, and your kids.
Now believing, as we are reporting indicated, that in fact there are no other strikes that are planned currently, but the U.S. president threatening if Iran does not come back to the negotiating table, if it does not sign off on an agreement to end its nuclear program, that there will be further retaliation by the United States.
Like a cow.
And he says it will be far greater and a lot easier. Now, the other thing that the U.S. president said, which is very clear, and I think is going to be clear a lot in the United States, is that the United States has erased this threat to Israel, but he did not say this threat to the United States.
Being scared, guess what?
Sit well with a lot of Americans who believe that Israel has now dragged the United States into a vulnerability that could be a broader escalation in the Middle East that could involve putting American troops at risk and drawing even further resources paid by the American taxpayers.
Yeah, Kimberly, you had Donald Trump there in his address, flanked by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, also U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And as you mentioned, Trump had called this operation a spectacular military success, but he also said, as you mentioned, that if there is no peace, that there will be tragedy far greater than what Iran has witnessed in the past 8 days or so. I mean, how do you square that message? And is this a moment of political peril for Trump?
It absolutely is a moment of political peril for Trump. Trump could even subject himself to potential impeachment if there is enough. And I don't think there would be the appetite in Congress right now, given the fact that it is controlled by Republicans. But again, that could change with midterm elections. The U.S. president has made himself very vulnerable politically. And we also have to point out that the 3 gentlemen that were standing behind him, the Secretary of State National Security Advisor Marco Marco Rubio, and then the two other gentlemen, the Vice President J.D. Vance and the Secretary of Defense.
Okay, how did I cause a problem?
Very different
that
views.
Wasn't needed when I just told you they've been screaming death to America for 30 plus years.
Any conflict in support of Israel, and I could tell you
they're making those nuclear bombs to kill Americans. They already killed thousands of soldiers,
He was really the
bro.
only one that was
They
championing
already been helping
and
Afghanistan
has been for many, many years
when
as a senator
America
on
went to
Capitol
war with
Hill.
Afghanistan.
But if you look at
Iran
many of the
helped
statements from J.D. Vance, the Vice President, as well as Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, they were far less interventionist and more advocating for the United States to play a lesser role in foreign conflicts. So it's going to be difficult for them as well politically, given the fact that J.D. Vance does have aspirations to run for president. Donald Trump cannot run after this term, and he is probably more than likely going to have to answer for this decision, which he is now attached to.
They already been threatening.
Kimberly, in the aftermath of the U.S. having entered the fray in Iran, entered the conflict in Iran, you now have, as you just described it, essentially a war between the interventionist wing of Trump's people and the isolationist wing of Trump's people. Do we expect that battle is going to heat up in the days to come?
What you going to do? Let them go complete.
And there are many that are looking to exploit that even further, namely the Democrats here in the United States, who are having their own issues as a political party right now. They are embroiled in a challenge with leadership, in fundraising, and of course the shellacking, to use President Obama's term, of the last election, where they really saw their ranks eroded in terms of support in about every sector of demographic that had traditionally supported the Democratic Party. So this is an opportunity for the political opponents, opposition of Donald Trump, who are going to seize on the fact that there are major divisions within the Republican Party over the action the U.S. president has taken. For anyone who hasn't followed Donald Trump, he has repeatedly said that he wanted to get the United States out of forever war. He was a sharp critic of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Now, he has also, the White House insisted, been very clear that he believed that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. However, what he has done as commander-in-chief is something that does not guarantee Iran couldn't obtain a nuclear weapon in the future. Even though these three sites have been targeted, we have not had any damage assessment. That presumably will come in the Pentagon briefing that the Secretary of Defense will hold at 12G on Sunday. But the bottom line is that even if there is one thumb drive with the information necessary to rekindle and start a new nuclear program, Iran is within its rights to do that. It has, as a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as a nation, a sovereign nation that does not have nuclear weapons, it is able to have nuclear energy for civilian purposes. It can continue to or restart a program of some kind. So the U.S. president, despite the fact that he has said that he has erased the threat to Israel, that he has completely obliterated any possibility of the nuclear program, this simply isn't the case, because the technology exists to rebuild it. And we know that when it comes to the targeting, Israel's targeting of nuclear scientists in Iran, that not all of them were taken out. So the U.S. president making some very broad claims in his very short address there in the entrance to the East Room of the White House, some that he will no doubt have to answer to politically and potentially even with further congressional action.
That's our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, live for us from Washington, D.C. Kimberly, thanks for breaking that all down for us. Please stay with us. We'll be coming back to you.
That's a fact.
Let's go straight now to Tauhid Asadi.
That's a
He's
fact.
in the Iranian capital,
You're
Tehran.
right.
Tauhid, what else are we hearing now from Iranian officials, and has there been any response to the remarks we just heard a few minutes back from U.S. President Donald Trump?
Well, actually, the latest response from the Iranian side goes to the Atomic Energy Organization of the country, which just a few minutes ago came out with a statement. Of course, it doesn't contain about how Iran is going to respond. The very fundamental question that we are dealing at the time being, seeing the previous statements that we heard from different Iranian officials, including the supreme leader, who a couple of days ago came out with a video message saying that any U.S. intervention into this already complicated situation is going to bring massive and quote-unquote irreversible damage. And also he said that the fact that U.S. intervention could be there shows that Israelis are weak. But right now, the reality on the ground is that this attack happened, and it happened after a series of previous attacks by the Israelis targeting different facilities, including Natanz. For several times, we had reports on that over the past few days about nuclear facilities of the country being targeted alongside with other military places. But right now, there is this big development about U.S. intervention into this intricate situation. We've got the statement from Iran's nuclear energy organization saying that it contradicts international law and it's quite against NPT. Also, they confirmed the attack on 3 nuclear facilities of Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. Also, they said that they were criticizing, quote unquote, IAEA for indifference and even support of this strike, noting that this was a couple of days ago, one day before the initiation of Israeli strikes, there was a resolution adopted by the Board of Governors of IAEA. And for some Iranians, that resolution paved the way for a possibility of this strike, though IAEA and the Director General himself told Al Jazeera that he denies such a sort of impact. Also, we've got this statement in which we've got this, they're saying that those 3 targeted sites were under quote-unquote continuous inspection of IAEA, and that they're saying this national industry, referring to Iran's nuclear program, is not going to be stopped, something that we were much expecting to hear. They were said that if attacks happen, this is not going to be the ending or termination of Iran's nuclear program. But still, we have to talk about a wider context, the bigger picture that is taking place. Speaking of the United States' role, first of all, Iranian officials previously criticized the United States. The Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and other officials were saying that initiation of Israeli strikes couldn't have happened without green light of the United States. Also, they were saying that any U.S. intervention runs the risk of a further escalated situation down the road, saying that it could move this escalation into a next unprecedented level, running the risk of a regional full-fledged, all-out war scenario. And now we see it, and we are seemingly in the middle of that scenario. Also, we have to keep in mind another key contextual element, and that's the very fact that Iran and the United States were in the middle of a diplomatic trajectory. Iran and the United States were supposed to have their 6th round of negotiations on Iran's nuclear program scheduled for last Sunday. But the thing is that now with this new developments, and previously Iranians were saying that under attack, seeing their country being targeted, they are not going to negotiate. We can rest assured that previously the process of diplomatic trajectory to settle down the issues was injured by this adoption of resolution by Board of Governors, by Israeli strikes, and now we see it being headshot after this U.S. direct intervention into this complicated scenario. And one last point that I think we have to keep in mind is that Iranians are saying that the resolution adopted by the Board of Governors, one important development, was drafted by the United States and 3 European countries. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was in Geneva at request, quote unquote, by him, at request of the European side. He said that I'm not there to get engaged in negotiations, but I'm there to listen to what they're saying. But at the heart of all these diplomatic developments, when he was in Turkey, when he was in Geneva, and the Iranians are saying we were just in the middle of this bigger context of negotiations, this strike took place, and this is going to be a new scenarios for which we are waiting. Speaking of Iranian response, I think we have to wait because this is really such a big development, and we are anticipating top Iranian officials to come out. And the big question here would be like how Iran is going to respond. To answer that question, we have to keep waiting.
All right, that's Tawhid Asadi live for us in
Well, y'all
Tehran.
going in
Thanks so
the
much,
comment
Tawhid.
section, man.
Let's go back now live to Harlan.
Shout out
He's
to
a
everybody in the
political
comment
military analyst,
section.
and he's also chairman of
Appreciate
the
y'all
Killing
for
Group
joining
and a
me.
senior advisor at the Atlantic Council.
I love
He's
the
joining me
different
from Washington, D.C. Harlan, thanks for coming back on to Al Jazeera with us.
different
So we've heard
thoughts.
now this address from U.S. President Donald Trump just a short while ago. He called the action that they had taken in Iran a spectacular military success, but he also said that the U.S. objective was the destruction
People
of
don't
Iran's
understand
nuclear
that war
enrichment
is just a
capacity
continuation
and a
of
stop to
negotiation.
the nuclear threat. From your assessment, what was the
I'm
main
the guy
message
that
here
support
from Trump,
GoFundMe
and what do you
101%.
think
I
this
supported
portends going forward?
Well, his message was clear: America first. I did what I need to do. I struck Iran to put them in a position where they have to negotiate. And without saying it, he meant I'm the greatest in the world. We will see what the bomb damage.
Let's get the likes up. Subscribe to the channel, guys. I'm your host, the one and only Stock Sniper.
You may not
Let's
recall,
get it.
but during the height of the bombing in Nazi
We got
Germany,
1,100 people in the building.
Germany
Appreciate
was
y'all
taking
for
more
joining me.
planes and submarines than any other time during the war. So we'll see what damage was actually done, but that's not the key issue. The issue is what comes next. And it could well be that President Trump has said, I did what I need to do. Now it's up to Iran and Israel to finish the conclusions that will end this particular conflict. I don't think it's going to happen. I think there are going to be continuing stages. I do not believe that Iran is going to sit back and allow this to happen. My expectation is that Iran has been prepared for this sort of attack. If they haven't, they're more incompetent than people can imagine. And so, as I said earlier, this may be the beginning of a long, long situation. Because quite frankly, the targets that are left in Iran are going to be the oil facilities, the gas facilities, and the infrastructure on which the Iranian public is dependent. And it turns out that the more bombing that one does, the more likely the population will turn against those doing the bombing. So it's not entirely clear that continued strikes against Iran are going to help mobilize some kind of resistance to the regime. In fact, it may turn the Iranian people solidly against the United States and Israel being the aggressors. We will see. I hope there will be a negotiation, but quite frankly, I don't think that's a very likely outcome.
Harlan, in the run-up to all this, Iran has been very clear, stating again and again that if the U.S. were to attack Iran, U.S. assets in the region would become retaliatory targets. What is the risk now of U.S. assets, bases, embassies, other assets in the Middle East being targeted?
There's always a risk. Often Iran resorts to rhetoric because its capabilities have been completely eroded given what's happened to Hamas and Hezbollah. But still, acts of terrorism are very possible. It would seem to me that the more likely attack by Iran would be against the naval base in Bahrain, which is only across the Persian Gulf, and certainly a number of short-range missiles and drone attacks could exact a huge price on Bahrain and the U.S. Fifth Fleet. I think it's very, very unlikely they'll be able to attack the two carrier battle groups that are in the Persian Gulf because they'll be able to defend themselves and they're substantially far away. But certainly, the possibility of attack against American installations, either in terms of a large attack or one or two terrorist attacks, is very, very real. And I'm sure the Americans are prepared for that, should it happen. And I suspect things like that will happen. To the degree that they will have effect on the United States remains to be seen. But supposing, for example, an American warship gets hit, gets sunk, suppose that Iran mines the Strait of Hormuz, and that leads to greater military action. So the escalation possibilities here are very, very great, and one does not necessarily see what the exit strategy is for the United States, for Iran, or the Israelis. And that leads to huge uncertainty. So at this stage, we hope that the escalation can be limited, but right now I would worry a great deal to see what happens, simply because we don't know what Iran is going to do. They have a vote in all this, and we certainly don't know the damage that's been achieved by the United States, whether it's been comprehensive or not. And of course, the next steps that play out over the next week or days are going to be very important to see whether this can be confined or whether it goes to the next level.
Harlan, what kind of reaction have you been seeing from pro-Iranian groups, whether in the region or in different parts of the world, when it comes to the run-up of these U.S. strikes on Iran, and also when it comes to what they believe the U.S. capacity is right now to essentially go forward. They're involved in different conflicts. Do they believe that the U.S. would actually get itself into a quagmire in the region?
I'm not sure that the Iranian leadership believes that could happen. But the fact of the matter is that history has shown the United States has got itself into a number of quagmires. And so the problem here is that Iran could escalate and force the Americans to do something that could lead to a greater involvement, which is very possible. It seems to me that Iran will retaliate some way, shape, or form. And as I said, I don't think that there's an exit strategy that's particularly clear, because I don't think that the Iranians are going to negotiate from a position of weakness, having been attacked without any kind of retaliation. The so-called Persian personality will arise, and Persians can be very tough-minded when the situation calls for it. So at this particular stage, I'm reminded of somebody who's jumped off the Empire State Building and passing floor 44 asked, how's it going? So far, so good. I hope that the outcome that befell that poor fellow does not befall us. But the fact of the matter is, this is a very serious situation. And the possibility, I say the possibility, not likelihood, of further escalation is very, very real and something that we ought to worry about, simply because I do not see any obvious exit strategy for any of the participants so far.
Harlan, I'm going to ask you to stay with us because I also want to bring another guest into the conversation, and I'll be asking him some questions coming back to you as well. Glenn Carl is a U.S. national security and foreign policy specialist and a former deputy national intelligence officer. He joins us now live from Boston. Glenn, thanks for being with us here on Al Jazeera. Let me ask you as well what you have seen when it comes to any reaction from pro-Iran groups in other parts of the world.
All right, Henry,
the
appreciate you for coming,
what
man.
What do you believe the U.S. is willing to do going
subscribe
forward?
to the channel and come rock with me a little bit more often.
Another quagmire in the Middle East?
I know you asked to be a moderator, but you got to come rock with me.
Well, I haven't seen anything
I go live
in the few
every single
minutes
day.
since the bombing and President Trump's
Appreciate
speech
you for joining me,
from any source about the Iranian allies or sympathizers and how they will react. But I think it's pretty clear that although most Iranian, the most pro-Western, pro-American Islamic society in the world is Iran. That said, most Iranians will be appalled at what's happened, oppose this, and sort of rally around the flag, if not the regime, to start. I think it's likely that the Iranians, very likely, cannot accept what's happened without attempting, if only for honor's sake, and more than that, to strike back. The most obvious place to do that, of course, is the American bases in the Middle East. But I would think, and I'm speculating here, they would want to do something that has a large impact. And so the Houthis seem to have the greatest capabilities of the Iranian surrogates so far. And if one could strike an American ship, that's a higher profile kind of response than an American base, I would think. But I don't know. Now, President Trump has done what I think people, at least I anticipated, which is to try to declare a victory and to stop this. But the gentleman who was speaking just before me, of course, pointed out that it's easy to start a war, but then you lose control of it because the other side gets to say also. And it's hard to, and there's no really replacement plan that I'm aware of for the Iranian government. So it is a fraught moment, and I would expect
I think by now everybody knows that
of some nature or
Trump dropped the bomb
in the
on
coming
Iran facility.
Hours or day.
I think everybody knows what happened.
Let me ask you,
now.
when it comes to the Americans going forward,
let me know what y'all think about it in the chat.
How concerned are they at the moment about potential retaliatory attacks from Iran or pro-Iran groups? We know the Iranians have said in the run-up to this often that if the U.S. were to strike Iran, that U.S. assets in the region would be targeted going forward.
What y'all think about what happened tonight?
How prepared is the U.S. in the region?
Sure. Well, a lot of the Iranian statements was bluster to try to forestall an American strike. But it's also the truth that if struck, Iran will try to strike back. Now, the equation for Iran is an excruciating one because
they want to
Trump spelled it out. if
they want to wipe out
Iran
Americans
strikes
too,
back,
not just
then he
not
implied
just
that
Israel.
the United States would take
They
such
want to
serious
wipe the
measures
Americans off the face of
then
the earth too.
that Iran's regime would be endangered. Nonetheless, they will. I think they will feel obliged to counterstrike if they can.
How y'all doing?
They
Appreciate y'all for joining me.
Now, how prepared are the Americans? I think the Americans
Shout
have
out to
been
everybody in the chat.
on the highest
Appreciate
level
y'all for
of
joining me
alert
and rocking with me.
possible throughout the region
Iran knew it was
for
coming. That's
quite
a
some
fact.
time, given the fact that the Iranians and the
It's
Houthis
horrible. We don't
have
need to
been
go to war. We got
striking
one
at
here.
American bases and personnel
Appreciate
throughout the
y'all for
region
joining
for
me.
2 years and more, certainly for 2 years since the Gaza war began, and even more so, the preparations or alertness will have gone up in the last week or two as it's become more and more likely that the U.S. would strike Iran. So to the extent that one can be on guard, the U.S. presence certainly is, sure.
All right, Glenn
see what else is
Carl
going
and
on,
Harlan
guys.
Ullman, thanks so much for being with us. Stay with us because we're going to come back to you in just a moment. If you're just joining us, in the past half hour, U.S. President Donald Trump has addressed the nation from the White House, calling the strikes on Iran a success. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little
Nazar,
while
how
ago.
you doing?
Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of
Appreciate
Defense,
you for joining me, Nazar.
Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody. And
how you doing, Sadiq?
In particular, God, I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military.
Appreciate y'all for joining me.
God bless the Middle East.
Subscribe to
God
the
bless
channel.
Israel, and God bless
And hit that like button. We got 40 likes. Appreciate y'all for hitting that like button.
All right, let's speak now once more to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Kimberly, more details emerging about the nature of those U.S. attacks on Iran. What are you hearing?
Yeah, that's right. You heard the U.S. president there talking about how he and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu worked as a team. What we know is that the U.S. president reaching out to his friend Bibi prior to the U.S. strikes and immediately after. But that's not all in terms of the communications by the White House. We also know that there has been diplomatic contact with Iran. That, of course, the United States and Iran do not have direct relations, but we know that the Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, has been in regular communication with the Iranian foreign minister in recent weeks. So that is something, a protocol that has been broken. But what I can tell you is that the Trump administration reaching out to Iran, saying that the strikes that have just been launched in the last few hours are all that the United States is planning. We also know that the United States sends a message that regime change is not something the United States is seeking in Iran. The message that was delivered was, again, the strikes that have been conducted are all the U.S. is planning at this moment, and regime change is not something that is in the calculations right now. Now, having said that, if Iran and it is rightfully able to retaliate, that, of course, could change the U.S. calculation. But what we know as well is in terms of what the operation was of those strikes, we're getting a better sense of what that looked like. We know that there were B-2 bombers that were flying in the air and that they were heading not just towards Guam, but they kept on going. Those are the aircraft that carry those 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs. And we know that 6 were dropped on Fordo, and that the United States also used 30 Tomahawk missiles on the other 2 remaining Iranian nuclear sites. Now, we know, and I mentioned this before, that even though the United States is only planning the strikes that have just occurred, it is briefing its personnel in the region for the possibility of counterstrikes. And here's why. We know there are some 40,000 U.S. troops in the Middle East. They're positioned in Iraq, about 2,500 in Bahrain. That is the headquarters of the 5th Fleet. Kuwait has 5 different U.S. bases, smaller bases. Qatar has that very large, major Al Udeid base. And, of course, the UAE, home to the 380th Air Expeditionary, as well as 3,500 U.S. soldiers. All of those now become vulnerable. In addition, the U.S. was positioning assets to support Israel as it was defending itself from the missiles and drone attacks that have been occurring from Iran. That would include carrier strike groups. That would include fighter aircraft. And they have been active in those operations.
What do you think
so this is no question a major escalation. And again, the U.S. president saying that he believes, as commander-in-chief, that he has stopped the nuclear enrichment that is taking place in Iran, and that the nuclear threat has been eliminated. But again, we are still looking for a further battle damage assessment. We know that that is likely to come, or rather bomb damage assessment, I should say. That is going to come in the form of a press conference that will be held Sunday in the United States at the Pentagon at 12G, where the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is expected to brief the American public on the operation that's taken place.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett joining us from Washington, D.C. Kimberly, thanks for bringing us up to speed. Let's take a closer look now at the 3 Iranian nuclear sites that have been attacked by the U.S. The Fordo enrichment plant is estimated to be 80 meters underground. That's well out of reach of Israeli missiles and requires more advanced U.S. weaponry. Natanz is Iran's biggest nuclear site and can enrich uranium to 60%. It's also heavily fortified with underground infrastructure. Isfahan is another critical nuclear site, which is a uranium conversion plant. Let's go straight now to Tauhid Asadi, who's joining us from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Tauhid, what's the latest on reaction from Iranian officials?
Well, actually, the latest development and the latest reaction, indeed, comes from the Atomic Energy Organization of the country a couple of minutes ago, coming out with a statement in this regard. Less than an hour ago, they said that they can confirm now that there was attack targeting 3 important nuclear facilities of the country, including Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. They have criticized actually the IAEA for their indifference and quote-unquote even support that resulted in this strikes, and they're saying that these three places were under continuous inspection of IAEA, and also they're saying that this national industry of nuclear program is going to be not stopped at this point. They're going to continue with that, and also they're saying that what happened contradicts actually the international law and specifically NPT. Iran is a signatory of NPT, and they're just referring to that. But also when it comes to reactions, we haven't heard anything specifically. This is sort of a technical statement that came out, but what tops the list of different questions regarding the recent very important development is that how Iran is going to respond. On that, we should still, I think, keep waiting for further let's say, upcoming events, further statements from Iranians, and also a report on the damage assessment, as we don't have that much of details about how far these recent strikes by the Americans have put impact on the extent to which the damage is out there. But speaking of the bigger context, we know that previously Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei warned about a potential and now practical U.S. intervention into this already escalated situation, saying that it's going to result in quote-unquote irreversible damage. And also he said that the fact that Israelis are going to knock the doors of Americans is a sign of their weakness. And that was something Kimberly previously mentioned, that weaponries, ammunitions of Americans were there required as the Israeli strikes were not sufficient. And also we have to keep in mind that these facilities, at least Natanz, I can say that for several times it was targeted by the Israeli strikes. Other nuclear facilities of the country were also targeted by the Israeli strikes. And now we see the U.S. intervention in the field that's obviously running the risk of further and further escalation. And also, again, speaking of this potentiality and the possibility of U.S. intervention, we have a previous context for that. First of all, the Iranian officials were criticizing the United States for its indirect support of the Israelis, and they were saying that Israeli strikes, that was what we heard from the Iranian president and other Iranian officials, including the Foreign Minister Abbas, who came out to say that these strikes couldn't have happened without the green light of the United States. They're calling the United States a sort of accomplice to Israel before these strikes. And also, they were saying that any U.S. intervention runs the risk of dragging the entire region into a full-fledged, all-out war scenario. And now, according to what we have already heard from Iranian officials, U.S. targets in the region are going to be a sort of retaliatory target when it comes to Iran's possible response to this very recent, critically important development. Also, there is another thing that we have to keep in mind, again, speaking of the context, and that is the very fact that Iran and the United States were involved in a trajectory of diplomatic engagement to settle down the issue. Last Sunday, it was supposed to be a 6th round of negotiations between Iran and the United States. And Iranians are saying from time to time and again that while the country were there to get engaged in negotiations to solve the issue, now what they see, the reality on the ground, is more and more and more of the strikes, and now the U.S. intervention, which is going to further complicate the situation. And one last point regarding this context is the resolution that was adopted a day before the initiation of Israeli strikes, and it was adopted after being drafted by Europeans and Americans. In particular, some Iranian analysts are putting forth the claim that this resolution being adopted paved the way, in a sense, specifically considering the timing of the strikes by Israelis, for this aggressive behavior by the Israelis to target different facilities, nuclear facilities, military facilities, and it goes without saying that they targeted also residential buildings and civilian areas across the country and also here in the capital. what we can say is that escalation is now name of the game that we can see on the ground, specifically after this recent development. For Iranian response, we have to keep waiting.
All right, that's Tauhid Asadi joining us live from Tehran. Thanks so much, Tauhid. As we've been reporting, the United States had already been shifting its military resources in the Middle East in response to the escalation between Israel and Iran. Al Jazeera's defense editor Alex Katopoulos takes a look at American assets in the region.
The United States has significant assets in and around the Gulf region. 5 Air Force expeditionary wings are based in the Gulf, 2 in Kuwait, 1 each in the UAE and Saudi Arabia that include squadrons of F-15 and F-16 fighter jets. The 5th Air Force Expeditionary Wing, based in Qatar, has no offensive capabilities of its own, but provides extensive intelligence and air refueling for Air Force units in the region. The number of air defense sites has grown over the last 18 months, with new ones built in Kuwait and a proposed site for an additional missile defense system in Qatar. The powerful US 5th Fleet is based in Bahrain in the Arabian Gulf. The Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group has its own air wing and fleet of accompanying ships capable of attacking targets deep inland, off the coast of Yemen in the Arabian Sea.
All right, let's go back to our guests. Harlan Ullman, a political and military analyst. He's chairman of the Kilowan Group and a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council. Also joining us is Glenn Carl, a U.S. national security and foreign policy specialist and a former deputy national intelligence officer. Harlan, let me start with you. Based on what you heard from Trump in the last half an hour or
Hello,
so,
Jared.
where
How you doing,
does this
Jared?
go from here, and how risky is the situation for American assets in the region now?
My concern is this, and clearly American assets in the region are going to be on high alert. But look, surprise almost works. And when you have an enemy who can pick their target at the time and place of their own choosing, it's very, very difficult to defend against that. But if you take a look at the war in Ukraine with thousands of drones, and of course, Iran has made drones for Ukraine. Supposing, for example, Iran were to flood the zone, that is to say, attack American targets across the Persian Gulf, which is about 200 miles, with literally dozens or hundreds of drones, they could overwhelm any defenses. And it would seem to me that that's if not the most likely possibility, certainly one of them that I would be worried about. Unfortunately, the president's speech did not lead really much to what the outcome is going to be. He expects that Iran, after this licking, is going to go to the negotiating table. I don't think that's the case. And I don't know that the president will be able to say, we've done our duty, now it's up to Israel to finish the job with Iran, because I don't think that's going to work. Obviously, the next step is Iran's, and I'm afraid I see escalation as too likely and something we need to worry about, because then what does the United States do? So I think that this strike, whether or not it's accomplished its purpose of destroying the infrastructure for Iran's nuclear programs or not, certainly it's left open the door for a lot of unpleasant things that could happen. And at this stage, I think we ought to plan on unpleasant things happening and hope for the best that they don't.
Glenn, let me get your take on this. Based on the details that are emerging about the types of weaponry that were used in this attack and the fact that President Trump has called it a spectacular military success and has essentially said that it takes out an Iranian nuclear threat going forward, do you think that's actually the case?
Well, it might be. There have been conflicting reports about Fordo, for example. The conventional assessment is that the site is 200 meters, I believe it is, below ground. But a representative of the IAEA said that he had visited the site and that it was 1,000 meters below ground. The bunker buster bombs apparently are not capable of going 1,000 meters down. So I don't think it's my guess is that it's not really possible at this point to know exactly how successful the strikes have been, although I don't disagree or doubt that the success has been at least substantial, but we don't know that. So what happens now is Trump has tried to declare victory and then wants us to go home. He's taken the minimalist approach that one can while engaging military forces. But as our colleague just said, you know, the next play in the game is Iran's. And it's hard to conceive that Iran would, at this point, abjectly say, okay, you're right, we renounce our nuclear program, or we agree to sign a deal. That's far less likely now than it was before. It is true, however, that the Iranians are stringing out the process and had come to the point of being able to manufacture a weapon. And the dispute, which is now
Trump just tweeted, guys,
somewhat moot because we're in the phase of direct hostilities between ostensibly the U.S. intelligence community and the Israelis and President Trump, I think was largely missed the point. Everyone agreed that Iran was lying to the IAEA and to everybody else, and was very close to being able to make a weapon. But that does not mean they had decided to manufacture one. For the Israelis, the decision was the potential is too great, the risk is too great, we must act. Trump agreed with that. Prior to that, the other parties thought, well, a non-weapon is not an existential threat, and the Iranians are doing this to try to forestall an attack. The calculation failed. But now the initiative really lies with the Iranians, and we can run strike after strike if need be.
Harlan, from your vantage point, do you believe that the U.S. military is actually prepared to defend itself if there are these strikes, retaliatory strikes from Iran or pro-Iran groups on U.S. assets in the region? And we know that there's been a debate in the Trump administration, some members of the interventionist wing of his administration and some of the isolationist members of his administration. But is the military prepared to take on what may potentially be coming their way?
The answer is, of course, we're prepared. But I repeat, surprise almost always works. And the enemy has to be seen as intelligent. And so they will pick a time and place of their choosing at which stage the Americans may be less prepared or surprised. I mean, look what Israel has done. Look what Ukraine has done against the Russians. And so I would worry that Iran could do that against us. And if Iran had some very, very bright, innovative people, there are ways that you could attack the United States military forces there and exact some kind of penalty, no matter how prepared we are, because then you're really in a shooting war. It becomes a matter of attrition. And if the Iranians are able to flood, that is to say, overwhelm our firepower with a number of drones or other weapon systems, they could exact some danger. But make no mistake, the military is prepared, but just being prepared does not mean you're going to be 100% successful, because unfortunately, war is filled with fog and chance, and sometimes the untoward happens. And this could be the case right now in terms of what Iran does. We will hope that's not the case. The military is prepared. Whether or not the military is prepared for an all-out strike against Iran some way, shape, or form is a different issue, because quite frankly, we are probably running out a lot of our top-end ordnance. We fired an awful lot of anti-ballistic missiles in defense of Israel, certainly in the Persian Gulf, and unfortunately, our warships cannot replenish at sea. So there are some weaknesses that we have. I'm sure the Iranians are aware of that. And if they are innovative and bright and clever, they could surprise us, and that would be a very, very difficult thing to accept. But unfortunately, having rolled the dice, it's something we've got to prepare for and try to minimize, but the unexpected could happen, and that's what worries me most.
Glenn, you know, over the course of the past few days, we've seen some extraordinary scenes play out in the U.S. because you had a sitting U.S. President, Donald Trump, rebuking the head of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, for testimony that she had given a few months ago in which essentially she said that Iran was not seeking to build a nuclear bomb, that was the intelligence assessment. I mean, based on that alone, would you say, from your perspective, that the U.S. military is prepared if they get more deeply involved in a conflict in the Middle East now?
Well, they are prepared, but let me return to that in a moment.
Trump ain't been president for 6 months yet.
Trump's rebuke of
a lot been going on in 6 months, bro.
I have been arguing
he hasn't even
an
been
important one,
president
which
for
I think
6 months
most analysts and observers, commentators have actually missed.
And a lot has happened.
No one has disputed
in 5 months
that Iran has had an aggressive program to develop the capability of manufacturing a nuclear weapon. and that the Iranians have lied, have refined more, processed more uranium than they've said. They are closer to having it. They've been much more aggressive than they have acknowledged. That doesn't disprove. Actually, that's not what the U.S. intelligence community said. The U.S. said they have not manufactured a weapon, and the Khamenei, the supreme leader, has not decided to order that it be done. Now, that is also true. Trump's rebuke was crude, typically of him, but what it really did was align himself with the Israeli assessment, which was it doesn't matter if they have one or not, they're very close, and this is an existential risk that we have to act
No new
upon.
wars. Remember that crap out
That's an
mouth?
important distinction.
Harlan, I'm sorry to
that doesn't
interrupt
really
you.
play upon the American preparation.
Glenn, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're going to come back to you in the next hour, but we're running out of time right now. I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's go back now live to Hamda Salhout, who's joining us from Jordan's capital, Amman. Hamda, so more details emerging about the call that U.S. President Donald Trump had with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What have you heard?
Correct, however, their nuclear capabilities was
well, just moments ago, the Israeli prime minister releasing yet another statement, this time in Hebrew, saying that right after these strikes happened in Iran against the nuclear facilities, that President Trump called the Israeli prime minister, and he described that conversation as, quote, warm and remarkable, saying that they discussed this specifically and that they also discussed things moving forward, meaning that there is still a possibility of future American strikes on Iran. We know that this path toward diplomacy has largely been stalled. The Iranians have said that they are not willing to negotiate under Israeli fire. But the Israeli prime minister also said that, quote, on June 13th, he promised that Iran's nuclear capabilities would be destroyed, and he has kept that promise. Speaking to his own citizens, he said that he did this because Iran is an existential threat to Israel's existence. And previously, the Army Chief of Staff had said that this is going to be a prolonged conflict because Israeli intelligence had told them that there was something Iran was doing that was reaching this point of no return.
All right, that's Hamda Salhout joining us live from Amman. Thanks so much, Hamda. Let's bring you up to speed. Here's what we know so far. The U.S. has attacked 3 nuclear facilities in Iran. President Donald Trump announced that a full payload of bombs was dropped on Fordo, Natanz, and
now he's bombing.
In his address to the nation a short while ago, Trump warned Iran not to retaliate, urging it to make peace. Otherwise, the U.S. will go after other targets. Trump says the objective of the strikes was to destroy Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and to stop any nuclear threat. He says all 3 facilities have been obliterated. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also spoken. He thanked the U.S. for the strikes. Shahram Akbarzadeh is the director of the Middle East Studies Forum at Deakin University in Australia and a senior fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs in Doha. He says the strikes on Iran will not lead the regime change in Tehran that the U.S. and Israel are hoping
Monday morning, it's going to be a bleeder.
I guess the most obvious precedent is what the United States did in relation to Iraq.
If you got calls,
the United States organized a coalition of the willing to topple Saddam Hussein under the false pretense that he was developing weapons of mass destruction. It happened that there were no WMDs in Iraq, that it was all a lie, and the United States plunged Iraq into decades of crisis and anarchy. So I think that's the precedent.
That's why,
and I think
that's why I have not been.
Why
I have not been
Netanyahu
swinging
has
no
been
call
pushing
options.
Trump to get engaged
because
they knew they couldn't destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. They
too much going on, bro.
And also they knew that with U.S. involvement,
long
they
term,
would set in train, set in motion a process of regime change. So Netanyahu's ultimate goal has always been
especially with how things are going,
the clerical regime
anything
in Iran.
Can happen overnight.
And he knew that the only way to achieve it is through U.S. involvement. So I think what's going on right now is that Trump is really going along with Bibi's Netanyahu's playbook in enforcing and enacting a regime change in Iran, just like they did in Iraq. what this attack has done is it has basically significantly eliminated and removed the threat of a popular uprising in the country. The idea, the logic behind the Netanyahu attack and the US attack is that this kind of military intervention would bring about a popular uprising to depose the government. Basing on the assessment that the government in Iran is unpopular and that it is ready to be toppled over. The fact of the matter is, when you have a foreign intervention and foreign military attack, that is only going to galvanize the population behind the government, even though the government in Iran is very, very unpopular. So the Iranian response to the U.S. military attack will be costly in terms of the military price that Iran has to pay, because we know that Iranian conventional military is really no match for the U.S. But politically, the regime will consolidate and benefit from this experience.
Going to the moon.
It's 3 GMT, 11 p.m. in Washington, D.C., 6:30 a.m. in Tehran. If you're just joining us on Al Jazeera, I'm Fully Batibo with our continuing extended coverage of the U.S. military strikes on Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump says American forces have conducted what he calls very successful strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. President Trump announced that a full payload of bombs was dropped on Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. In his address to the nation a short while ago, the U.S. president warned Iran not to retaliate, urging it to make peace, otherwise the U.S. will go after other targets. Trump says the objective of the strikes was to destroy Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and to stop any nuclear threat. He says all three facilities have been, quote, obliterated. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also spoken. He has thanked the U.S. for the strikes. Let's listen to what President Trump said in his address to the nation a short while ago.
Because gas gonna go up.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu.
I think that's going to change.
We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular,
I think it's 5 o'clock in the morning in Iran.
I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military.
I think it's 5 o'clock in the morning over there.
God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel.
We're
and
really
God
gonna
bless
find out.
America. Thank you very much.
Let's now bring in our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett in Washington, D.C. Kimberly, it was just about 48 hours ago that the president said he was weighing his options and giving himself about 2 weeks to decide whether the U.S. would intervene in the conflict. It's happened in 48 hours or so now. How is he justifying these strikes now?
Yeah, the U.S. president not giving a lot of justification beyond saying that he has eliminated the threat, and that the fact is that the United States was at risk simply because Iran has been for decades shouting death to America. But that is not going to sit well with the many of the president's political opposition, the Democrats in Congress. In fact, there's a statement that's just come out from Senator Jeanne Shaheen. She is a ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and she says that the U.S. president also did not brief members of Congress prior to taking action, something that has been a bipartisan tradition. She says that Americans will no doubt be ensuring more risk as a result of President Trump's actions, striking those 3 nuclear sites. Now, Foley, I can also tell you that we're getting a better sense of what some of the operation looked like. The bunker buster bombs that were used, there were, we understand, 30,000 those 30,000-pound bombs. 6 of them were dropped on Fordo, and the 30 Tomahawk missiles were used on the other 2 Iranian sites. Now, we also know that the U.S. president spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, prior as well as after the strikes by the United States on Iran took place. But we also know that the United States reached out to Iran. It typically does not have direct relations. However, we believe, and we're told that this was some sort of diplomatic message that was conveyed, that the United States says that just those 3 sites are what is in the battle plans, and they are not planning regime change.
I was going to ask you about that. In fact, I mean, this operation striking these 3 particular sites, is it a one-off? What are the Americans saying about what they might do next?
Well, we know that that is the intelligence that the U.S. president was requesting just a couple of days ago. On Thursday, to be specific, he was briefed and he was told that this is a possibility. We remember that the U.S. president has campaigned that he does not want to take the United States into these so-called forever wars. He was a heavy critic of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, as well as Joe Biden and his actions, withdrawal in Afghanistan. But what we know is that the U.S. president for his part, has now put the United States at risk of being subject to retaliation. The fact is that there are a tremendous number of U.S. troops, some 40,000 in the region. There are also, of course, the various bases in the region and the carrier strike groups and the aircraft. So there is the possibility of retaliation, even as the U.S. president has warned Iran against that.
You've told us already about some of the reactions there in Washington, Kimberly, and there were already divisions.
I can't wait till it get daylight over there so we can see what it looks like.
The necessity of the strikes, especially considering the War Powers Act. What's going to be the fallout from this politically? The president needs Congress to get the U.S. into war. There are exceptions, of course. And there was opposition even from some of the president's own supporters, some of the members of his MAGA movement.
Yeah, that's right. And the exceptions being that there's precedent that prior presidents have ignored the U.S. Constitution and have gone in unilaterally without the permission of Congress. But the U.S. Constitution is very clear that the only way the United States could take unilateral action, as the president and commander-in-chief has just done, is if there is an imminent threat to the United States. And the U.S. president did not outline that in his speech. He said that he had assisted Israel, but he did not say in any way that that there was any sort of imminent threat to the United States. So this is going to be something that will be heavily criticized by the U.S. president's, not only opposition Democrats, but as you point out, also members of his own party. In fact, Congressman Tom Massey, who is a Republican in the House of Representatives, has said since the strikes, responding to Donald Trump's Truth Social post about the announcement of the strikes on the 3 nuclear sites, this is not constitutional. Now, there are others in the party that will support this, including Senator Lindsey Graham. But again, the majority of the American public is not in favor of the action the president has just taken.
Right. And beyond the constitutionality of this, there is also the fact that President Trump had said all along that he didn't want the U.S. to be involved in any more wars in this region. He's gone against all of the things that he promised, really, regarding this during his campaign.
And that is going to affect him politically. We have the midterm elections that will be coming up. They happen 2 years after the presidential election. And already the United States Congress is a very thin majority for Republicans. There's no question that the U.S. president could pay for this politically come the midterm elections. But there's someone else that can pay for this politically, and that is the Vice President, J.D. Vance. He was standing behind the U.S. president as he made this announcement and address to the American people from the entrance to the East Room of the White House. He is the one that is likely to take the baton, if you will, from Donald Trump, who cannot run for another term, and run for president. And he is also someone who, like Donald Trump, advocated for less intervention, U.S. intervention around the world. So now he is attached to this decision. He is part of this decision. And he is, in addition to the U.S. president, who we should point out could potentially even be impeached if the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives and have investigatory power. But there's no question that there is going to be political fallout for both Donald Trump and his vice president as a result of these actions.
Kimberly, thank you very much for the moment. That's Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent. Let's now take a closer look at the 3 Iranian nuclear sites that have been attacked by the U.S. The Fordow enrichment plant is estimated to be 80 meters underground. That's well out of reach of Israeli missiles and requires more advanced U.S. weaponry. Natanz is Iran's biggest nuclear site and can enrich uranium to 60%. It's also heavily fortified with underground infrastructure. Isfahan is another critical nuclear site, which is a uranium conversion plant. Let's go live now to our correspondent in the Iranian capital, Tauhid Asadi. Tauhid, good morning to you. Can you tell us about the initial reaction in Iran to the U.S. strikes and what the damage assessment is at this hour?
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Well, actually, when it comes to the early reactions, we've got this statement from the Atomic Energy Organization of the country, and also another statement just came out a few minutes ago about about actually the signs of contamination. They said that there is no sign of nuclear contamination as of date, according to their data. It's a statement that we heard from the Center for Nuclear Safety. Also, they said that there is no danger for people living in the nearby area. But speaking of a previous statement that we got from the Nuclear Energy or Atomic Energy Organization of the country, they confirmed that 3 nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, were targeted by the airstrikes of quote-unquote enemy. And also they said that that's a quite clear contradiction of international law, in particular NPT. Iran is a signatory of which, and also they said that IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, should be criticized for its indifference and quote-unquote even support as a result of which this recent strikes are taking place. And also they said that these sites, these places targeted, were under full inspection of IAEA, and that the national industry related to nuclear program of the country is not going to be stopped there. This is the very latest statement that we have from the Iranian side. We are still waiting. I'm sure that it doesn't answer the very fundamental question that is out there, which is how Iran is going to react right now.
Indeed.
For that, we are waiting for further military and political statements coming out, as this recent statement looks to be more technical, but we can
Let me ask you
consider
about
this bigger context in which Iran is
That's
saying
what I want to know
the
too,
United States decides to.
You are
What
right to say that
Russia
it's
and
too
China
early
is
now for the
thinking
political
right
reactions
now.
because it's very early in the morning in Tehran. But just to recap, what you were telling us, what we heard from the Iranian Atomic Agency is that no sign of contamination right now as a result of these 3 U.S. strikes on these 3 sites, and no danger for the people living around these sites. Which brings me to the question of whether there was any sort of preparations made by the Iranian authorities in anticipation of a potential U.S. strike on these sites. We have been talking for a number of days now about the Fordow plant. Were there preparations made to clear these sites, perhaps, in advance?
Yes, I can cite the same statement that came from the Center for Safety, Nuclear Safety of the country. They said that there was some preparation, and also initially we've got this report from IRIB, the state TV, claiming that no nuclear material, no dangerous material were there under the when these strikes took place. I'm sure that we have to keep waiting for further details, as still we don't have anything about damage assessment coming from the Iranian side. For that, we should keep waiting. But what we know is that based on what they have put out as a sort of a statement, we can rest assured that Iranians were sort of prepared for this, specifically after Donald Trump, the U.S. president, came out to say that there is a possibility for such a strike. And now, as I told you earlier, and as you mentioned, they're saying that for the people living nearby, there is no danger, according to the latest data. But still, we have to keep in mind that this is not the first time that Iran's nuclear facilities are being targeted. Previously, from day one of the Israeli strikes, Natanz was targeted for several times alongside with other nuclear facilities of the country. And from the Iranian side, what we are having at these over the past few days is that these centers were under full inspection of IAEA, and that's quite contradictory to the international law, as the statement coming from the Atomic Energy Organization of the country says. But speaking again of a broader context, we have to keep in mind that Iranians previously were saying that the United States is there to be blamed because it gave a sort of green light for the initiation of the Israeli strikes. And of course, there had a role there when it comes to the resolution that was adopted by the Board of Governors of IAEA. They're saying that this resolution was drafted and then supported by the United States and other three European countries. Also, we had this earlier warning, speaking of the response, something that is critically important at the time being.
Right. Tawhid, let me just ask you, let me jump in there and ask you about the options on the table now for Iran. Prior to the U.S. Attacking these 3 sites, the Iranian had warned against any U.S. intervention in the conflict between Iran and Israel. We are, of course, as you said, waiting for political reaction. But what might Iran do next? How will they respond to the U.S. entering the conflict?
Well, speaking of the details, so far Iranians have decided not to spill the beans about their plans, but the very gist of the matter was something that we heard from the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei when it comes to his very latest video statement that came out a couple of days ago. He said that the possibility of U.S. intervention runs the risk of quote-unquote irreversible damage, and he said that previously that is going to lead into escalation. And it was also Iranian president, Iranian foreign minister, they're all saying that this possibility, which is now getting translated into reality, runs the risk of dragging the entire escalation, which is already in an unprecedented level, to a next level in which there is a possibility for a regional all-out war scenario that is a very dangerous scenario according to Iranian officials. And the Iranians are saying that we haven't prepared for this. We talked to one of military officials, security officials. He said that we haven't prepared for it in the last 10 years, and we are going to have no problem with prolonged war, according to this military official who told us about that possibility. The thing is that Iranians are prepared for that, but speaking of the reaction, they're saying that any American asset in the region is going to be a potential retaliatory target when it comes to Iranian response. But now that red line is crossed. American intervention, something Iranians were warning about, is there as a part of reality on the ground. But still, we have to keep waiting to see how Iran is going to formulate its response.
Okay, Tauhid, we will, of course, be checking in with you throughout the morning here when we get more reaction from Iran. Tauhid Asadi in Tehran there. Tauhid reminding us that the Iranian Atomic Agency has said there is no sign of contamination and no danger for the people living in the area of the 3 sites that were attacked by the United States, those 3 sites being Natanz, Isfahan and Fordo. And we're also hearing from regional nuclear agencies, the Saudi Nuclear and Radiological Regulatory Commission, saying no radioactive effects were detected on the environment of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Arab Gulf states as a result of the U.S. military targeting Iranian nuclear facilities earlier today. Now, just before President Trump delivered his address, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a pre-recorded video statement on the U.S. strikes on Iran. He said history will record the U.S. acted to deny Iran the most dangerous of weapons. Take a listen.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
For more on this, let's bring in Hamda Salhout, who joins us from Jordan's capital, Amman. So the U.S. intervention is what Prime Minister Netanyahu had wanted all along, direct U.S. involvement in Israel's conflict with Iran. Talk to us more about what he said and the reaction from Israel.
Well, the Israeli prime minister actually released 2 statements. One of those statements just around 30 minutes ago in Hebrew, addressing the citizens of Israel, saying that on June 13th, Netanyahu promised that he would destroy Iran's nuclear program and capabilities, and saying that he kept that promise and that moving forward, Israel is going to continue with their attacks on Iran until they feel they have accomplished all of their goals since they started this all 10 days ago. But the reaction from Israel, keep in mind it's around 6:30 a.m. local time, but the reaction that has come out has been in support of this. Remember, it's what the Israelis had been wanting all along. There were private conversations happening behind the scenes since before this had even taken place, saying that the Israelis wanted American assistance in striking the Fordo nuclear facility in particular, because no Israeli weaponry could reach it because it's so far underground. So now that the Americans have responded and rather have conducted strikes of their own, the region is bracing for what sort of response there is going to be from the Iranians. Israel has now closed its airspace once again because in fear of any sort of retaliation from Iran. But nonetheless, the Israeli Prime Minister has been thanking President Trump, saying that this was a success.
What are Israel's objectives in this war with Iran? And do these U.S. strikes constitute, Hamda, an achievement in any way for Israel, where we could see the Israelis now back off and end their military operation against Iran?
Well, according to Israeli officials who've spoken to media this morning, they say that the attacks on Iran will certainly continue, that they are in no way finished, because they say that it's not only the nuclear facilities and nuclear capabilities that they were after, that's what they wanted to destroy, but they also want to destroy all of the ballistic missile capabilities, all of the drone capabilities, anything militarily now that the Iranians have, because they had retaliated and fired back at Israel after those initial attacks on June 13th. That's what they want to destroy. The military has said that this is going to be a prolonged campaign and that people in Israel should brace themselves for more attacks. And that was nearly 2 days ago. But the Israelis say that this was one of their big goals, was to eliminate Iran's nuclear capabilities. And Netanyahu says that that has now been accomplished. That has also been echoed by U.S. President Donald Trump. But again, there's a lot of fear as to what escalation this can cause in the region, because this is not just the Israelis now, this is the Americans getting involved. There are other regional actors who could potentially get dragged into this as well. So now Israel is looking to see what they are going to do next. There have been new guidelines from Homefront Command that have been issued inside of Israel. There have already been guidelines about limiting gatherings, limiting any sort of large crowds outside. And now they've closed schools. They have closed most workplaces. Only essential workers are allowed to leave. They're asking people to stay in safe rooms. There are a lot of people in Israel who have decided to live in these makeshift underground sort of shelters in mall parking lots and such. So the Israelis say that this is one large accomplishment, striking the Fordo plant, because again, they could not do that on their own, and they were hoping the United States would get involved, and they said they worked together in tandem on these attacks.
As you said, Hamda, fear of what might happen next now and how Iran will respond. But already in the last week, we've seen Iranian missile attacks in Israel, on Israel, targeting multiple sites, and you know, the damage, the scale of these attacks is unprecedented for Israel. Remind us of what the Iranians have been able to hit within Israel and the sort of psychological impact it's had on the Israeli population.
We holding over 300 people in the chat.
Well, the Israelis certainly underestimated what type of response they were going to get, because Israel, while it has a pretty ironclad defense system, it's certainly not foolproof, and there have been a lot of projectiles that have been able to bypass these air defenses and hit pretty strategic targets in Israel. That includes ones that are used by the government and the military, both in the north and the south, essentially paralyzing the country. The biggest shipping company in the world has said that they are no longer going to be sending their ships to Haifa. The airspace is closed. FedEx is no longer shipping to Israel. But that's just the business aspect of it. When it comes to the people themselves, people say that they are traumatized by what is going on, because they haven't really had this type of scale of damage in whatever war Israel has been involved in, because usually it's short-range projectiles that are launched that are pretty easily intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system. But this time, that's simply not the case. You're looking at least 25 people in Israel who have been killed, hundreds of others injured, and not to mention the damage and destruction that has been done to areas in the north and the south and in the central part of the country, like Tel Aviv.
Thank you, Hamda, for that. Hamda Salhout in Amman, Jordan, for us with the latest reaction there from Israel. Now, let's look at how President Trump announced those U.S. strikes on Truth Social just before midnight GMT. He said, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There's not another military in the world that could have done this, he says. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Let's bring in now Sina Azodi, an assistant professor of Middle East politics at George Washington University, who focuses on Iranian foreign policy. His live from Washington. Thank you so much for being with us on Al Jazeera, Sina. Your thoughts first, and you know, on what's happened. How do you view this U.S. involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict and the U.S. president's justification for entering the war?
Well, first of all, let me just say that, you know, this makes Iran the only country in the world that has been targeted by two nuclear weapon states at the same time. We also have to keep in mind that the U.S. president's decision, according to his own Republican supporters, was an unconstitutional decision to attack the country.
Was this really necessary, though?
It also violates the NPT, and I think that it fundamentally changes the U.S.-Iranian relations for the years to come. It could potentially have an impact on the non-proliferation regime in the long term. And what I mean by that is that Iranians could finally come to the conclusion that remaining in the NPT no longer serves their interests, and become, after North Korea, become the second country that leave the non-proliferation regime.
Iran, prior to this attack by the United States, had already warned against any
the intelligence
US
said that
intervention in the
Iran was
conflict.
going to use those nuclear
It had
weapons
threatened that it would retaliate.
against
What
America
are Iran's
and
options right now
Israel.
after what's happened today? Will it pursue a measured counterstrike, or are you seeing a broader escalation here?
Well, based on Iran's behavior in the past, I think we should expect a response, a counterattack by Iran with loudest political message with minimum potential casualties. Because if there are potential casualties, American casualties, the U.S. president will respond, and it could potentially lead to a full-scale confrontation between Iran and the United States. And this is something that President Trump has repeatedly said that he wants to avoid. He criticized former presidents George W. Bush, Obama, and Biden for getting the U.S. involved in perpetual wars in the region. So, and he has said that I'm the president of peace. And he certainly doesn't want to be the president who started yet another war in the region, especially with Iran, which is much larger than Iraq, has a much larger population, and it could not be as easy as Iraq.
Done years ago.
And we saw what happened.
They hate Americans and
have
been
Sina Azodi, stay with us. I'm going to bring in Abbas Aslani, who's joining us from Tehran. He's a senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. Thank you, Abbas, for being with us. Your thoughts about what's happening? And is there a scenario here in which Iran can respond to these U.S. attacks without escalating the situation further?
He stubbornly said, well,
well, I think a response from Iranian side seems certain. It could be maybe three scenarios. One could be the limited
she changed her mind, though.
The size of the damage. But let's not forget that in addition to the attack to the nuclear facilities, this is U.S. direct entry into the war with Iran. So Iran had earlier warned that it will respond to this, action. But the second scenario could be a full-scale war. Iran trying to engage in serious, let's say, attacks against U.S. interests as well as the Israeli ones. This could include a wider scope of targets, which could Iran can reciprocate similar, targets in Israel by going after Israeli nuclear sites, as was stated earlier, and allies of Iran could join this conflict. And Iran has levers like in the Strait of Hormuz to close and to block the transit of energy in the region. This could have repercussions not just for the regional security, but for global
we got 250 people in the building.
And market
Appreciate
as well.
y'all for joining me.
But scenario could be a combination of the previous one. It could be a hybrid
Subscribe
one.
to the channel.
Iran can start, responding against U.S. interests
appreciate
as
y'all
well as
commenting.
Israelis. But this could escalate to, let's say, further, conflict and serious ones. Whether this will, expand into a full-scale war, it will depend on the both sides and the role that other third parties and countries can play in this regard.
Let me ask you about what Abbas Asmani said there. He thinks that this could lead to a regional escalation. Is there a scenario where we could see Iranians, Iran's allies,
I know. I want to hear what Russia and China
Yemen's
got to
Houthis,
say.
for example, who had until now, at least for the past 10 days, not been
I want to hear what Russia and
fully
China got to
engaged
say
anyway
too about all
in
of
the
this.
Israeli-Iranian conflict. Are we likely to
what's
see
really going to
Iran's
happen?
allies in the region now enter the fray?
Certainly, it is not 100%, but surely Iranians can ask them to start attacking potentially American interests, Israeli interests. But we also have to keep in mind that the Houthis signed their own ceasefire with the United States.
Exactly.
I don't know if the Houthis would be willing to jeopardize it, but absolutely there's a possibility they could start attacking Israeli ships or any ship
China
that
is the biggest
goes
problem we
towards
have.
Is inbound for
Yeah.
Israel or outbound.
I agree.
It really depends on the Houthis' thinking, but we
And
also
people
have
don't
to
even
again
realize
keep in mind that
China's
Houthis
the
are
biggest
more independent from Iran
problem we have.
than
That's a
other regional
I
friends
follow
that
you
Iran
as
has.
well. I like the interesting
Gentlemen,
points
stay
of
with
view.
me, both of you. Harlan,
Thank you,
Abbas
Chair.
Asmani and Sina Azodi,
Tank,
stay with me. I'm going to bring in
go for it.
Harlan Ullman into the conversation to get the U.S. perspective on all of this. He's a political and military analyst, chairman of the Kilowan Group, and a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council, joining us from Washington, D.C. I wanted to get your thoughts first, Harlan, on President Trump's justification of these attacks on Iran. He said that the U.S. was at risk of an imminent attack of from Iran. Do you believe that?
No. And I think what President Trump decided was that this was an optimum time. I think that the intelligence community was correct in that there's no evidence that Iran is moving to develop a weapon, but it certainly has done things to move in that direction. And given what Israel has done in terms of disarming much of Iran,
or what?
I think the president felt that having given warnings to Iran, now was the time to act. I think in his view, he believes that there's one deft strike that's going to be able to produce a peace agreement, or at least a negotiation. This is the way Donald Trump thinks. And I'm afraid that's not going to be the case. As I said earlier this evening, I'm afraid that this is going to be the beginning and not the end of these issues. And I can almost guarantee you tomorrow, Iran will present evidence that the Fordo installation was not badly damaged by the Americans. And the press conference that will be given tomorrow morning, American time, with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, will show how much damage has been done and that the Iranian program has been set back years, possibly. The fact of the matter is, I don't think anybody will really know the extent of the damage in the United States. But this leaves open the door to a great deal of potential escalation. And one of the areas of escalation that has not been mentioned.
But when I first seen how
very powerful
Trump came out to let us know, that kind of remind me of when Obama came out to let us know that they took care of Osama bin Laden.
Almost immediately.
Abbas Asmani in Tehran, let me ask you about that, and also about the damage at these three sites that the U.S. attacked.
The same way Obama
Fordo,
did.
Isfahan, and the third one, it'll come back to me in a second. But were there any preparations that were made prior to Natanz, prior to the U.S. intervention? Because there had been, of course, rumors all week long that the U.S. might get involved in the conflict and might help the Israelis attack Fordo, for example. Were there any plans made by the Iranian authorities to perhaps clear these sites ahead of any U.S. intervention?
Well, yes, because this didn't, caught Iran by surprise, and that's why, a few days earlier, Iran was expecting such kind of action taking place from the U.S. side. So that's why they had some precautionary measures and arrangements, and they had, transferred those nuclear material in order to avoid radiation and contamination, specifically for those who are residing near to those facilities.
The same thing that Obama
And
did.
we have been hearing
He did
from
the
Iranian
exact same
officials that,
thing.
those measures had been done in order to make
Yep,
sure that
Obama handled that
no
swiftly.
damage will be done to those people living around, or in the vicinity of those nuclear facilities or close and nearby. And also there have been some, reports or comments from local officials. They have been saying that the damages, specifically in Fordo, have not been that significant as portrayed by U.S. president. They are saying that it has been, somehow damages in the surface or the entrance of the facility, which could be repairable. Fordo has been a heavily protected and fortified underground nuclear facility. Penetrating to that facility could be difficult. It could make delay the progress and development in that facility. But comparing to that facility, Natanz and Isfahan could be, let's say, much more accessible. The amount and the extent of the damage to Natanz and Isfahan, I think, is being investigated. We have no, detailed information and precise one on those two nuclear facilities. But all in all, this may not end the nuclear industry in the country. This is what is being said by the Atomic Energy Organization in the country, as well as officials. They are saying that you cannot kill the knowledge even by killing scientists or bombing nuclear facilities, and this may strengthen the resolve in the country in order to continue to develop the nuclear program.
Sina Azodi, your thoughts about what Abbas Aslani was saying there. I mean, the Iranians would have made preparations ahead of any U.S. attack. In terms of what happens next, we've talked about the possible scenarios here. Harlan believes that this could escalate and that we're not going to see just a one-off with this operation, that this might be a bigger U.S. intervention. Is that how you see things evolving as well within the next few days?
Well, yes, I agree. And unfortunately, the president has not left Iranians with much of a choice, a safe-facing ramp, because of the way he spoke to Iranians, because of the mere strike on the Iranian homeland by the United States. Iranians will be forced
Israel has already
to respond.
Been
but as I discussed, there are three different options, three main options that Iranians have. And absolutely, I think it has the capacity to escalate into a broader conflict in the region, which would drag the U.S. In another war. And this is something that the Prime Minister of Israel has always wanted to do it.
Harlan, dragging the U.S. into another war in the region is what President Trump said he was not going to do. What do you think led him to this decision today? Was
Iran says that U.S. citizens are now a target.
Pressure or Israeli influence, non-stop Israeli influence on him? What led him to basically go against what many in his party had not wanted? They didn't want to get involved in further wars in the region. What do you think it is that led him to make this decision today?
Guy was preaching moral values.
Nobody wanted Iran to have a nuclear weapon. The question was, how do you deal with that? Did you do that through diplomacy? And of course, Trump abrogated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action when he became president the first time. And it seems to me that's what put us on this course, because I think that the JCPOA would have was working. Having said that, the president probably decided that this was an opportunity to use American power, and I think he really believed that by attacking Fordo,
I'm gonna change it to this other one,
and Natanz and Isfahan, he could really set the program back and then leave it up to the Israelis to finish off what needs to be done.
But the reason I asked that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Harlan, is that it seems that his stance on Iran has
unconstitutional, it's illegal, and there's a lot of bipartisan opposition to what Trump has done. And so we have already had Congress people say that they're going to begin impeachment proceedings against him.
Iran claims no serious damage.
We don't know exactly how
all three
it's going to turn out, but Trump could be in a lot of political trouble.
Look, Iranian media, U.S. bases, citizens.
Exactly.
Now
There's a lot of points that you mentioned. I really want to come to all of them one by one. I'm going to start with the issue of Congress that you raised up, which is really important because we have some Congresswomen, Congress members seeing this. We just had one of the comments by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who called Trump's actions clear grounds for impeachment. Did Trump not see this happening? And is there actually a possibility of impeachment?
U.S. attacks will not stop nuclear.
Possibility, perhaps, but it's a long shot. Trump's base was opposed. The majority were opposed to U.S. doing this. That's among his MAGA supporters. Much of his support from those people was that he promised an isolationist U.S. policy, an America first U.S. foreign policy, that he was not going to get the U.S. involved in these kinds of wars, and he lied to them. And so there's going to be some of them are going to stick with Trump because they worship him and think he's got some superior wisdom. But a lot of them are appalled by this and were opposed to it and saying so. We've seen them grovel to Trump in the past, so we don't know how strong they're going to be in their convictions if they have the integrity to keep opposing this. The Democrats have a lot of hawks also who are very strongly tied to Israel, who probably wanted to see the United States do this. So we're seeing a splintering of the traditional party alliances. And that could go anywhere at this point. And I think that the old parties really do need to be broken up, and we need different kinds of alliances.
Absolutely, and it's very interesting how this conflict has actually created, a whole situation in even U.S. politics. We were also talking about different actors in this whole conflict in West Asia. I'd like you to stay with us, and we have some breaking news coming in, and I would like your reaction to that. And well, breaking news just coming in. Palestinian militant group Hamas has condemned the American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities as blatant U.S. aggression. Now, in a statement, the group added that the strikes were a dangerous escalation and a flagrant violation of international law and a direct threat to international peace and security.
There's not a chance to get
Meanwhile, Israel has announced the closure of its airspace in the aftermath of the strikes. Now, the first reactions from some of the actors in West Asia, we just getting in, is the reaction from Palestinian militant group Hamas, who has now condemned the American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities as blatant U.S. aggression. In a statement, the group added that the strikes were a dangerous escalation and a flagrant violation of international law and a direct threat to international peace and security. Now, these are the breaking news we're coming in. I would like to go back to Professor.
They said U.S. citizens are now
we were just discussing, and you had mentioned Houthi and all these elements in West Asia. I want to know your reaction. Is this now, what kind of, escalation are we seeing in the regions, and what actors can actually come into play? Not just, and when I'm talking about that, it's not just the proxies, Iranian proxies, but of course, region-wise, the countries that can get into this. We have Jordan, whose airspace has somehow been involved in this. How do you see this escalate further, and these different actors playing out a role in this whole conflict?
It's very hard to predict. Anything is possible. This could turn into a much broader regional war. We've seen Iran in the past strike these Saudi oil fields. Now China brokered a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has been condemning the Israeli attacks on Iran. So it's likely that that's not going to happen against Saudis or the United Arab Emirates, but we don't know. So those things are possible. More missiles against Israel. Iran has a finite number of the longer range missiles that can strike Israel, but it has an abundant amount of the shorter range missiles that can strike U.S. bases in the area or other countries. So a lot of things are possible at this point. You know, and Iran is a proud nation. I'm no fan of the theocracy that runs Iran. I think it's highly repressive, and not only toward women. But if there's going to be regime change, it needs to come from the Iranian people. We saw how well the last time the U.S. did regime change there. In 1953, when the CIA overthrew Mossadegh after he had nationalized the British oil industry in Iran, that led to the coming in of the Shah and the repressive regime by the Shah and Savak, which was in power for another 26 years after that the Islamic Republic overthrew. So this kind of instability, where it's happened in the past in Libya, in Yugoslavia, I mean, these are in Iraq, Afghanistan, we see the consequences, and they almost never turn out the way that people expected. You know, as Robert Gates, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense and head of the CIA, says, haven't people learned anything from what happened in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya? Don't they understand that these kinds of operations have unintended consequences? And that, you know, so there's clearly Iran's capabilities are weakened.
Strikes in America,
but Iran is a nation of 92 million people.
Orchestrated by Israel.
They are a major force in the area. And what a lot of the experts have argued, based on historical studies, is that wars are never won from the air. You always require boots on the ground. Well, who's the boots on the ground going to be? The Israelis don't have the numbers to do that. Does that mean the United States is going to get involved in a war that's overwhelming majority of Americans oppose? You know, so the Israelis are happy, and Trump seems to be happy, and some of the hawks in the United States are happy, but the potential disastrous consequences are yet to be seen.
Absolutely.
Now, let me.
Yes, sure.
Can I make one?
Absolutely. Of course you can.
You know, because this is all Trump's doing to begin with. The JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that Obama had negotiated, was working brilliantly. The IAEA, which had hundreds of investigations, including spot investigation without any warning, said that Iran was complying with the terms. Under that deal, Iran could only enrich to 3.67% and have a limited amount and a limited number of centrifuges. And what does Trump do? He blows it up. And then he comes in now and says he wants to negotiate a better deal than Obama's deal. But he draws a red line and says zero enrichment is going to be allowed. That was not a serious negotiation. There was never any way that the Iranians could accept giving up their right to enrich nuclear energy. If Trump had brains and capability, he could have worked out a deal where Iran would enrich to a very, very low amount, and there'd be heavy intrusive inspections, so we knew that they weren't cheating. Under the old deal, they were more than a year away from developing nuclear weapons.
Right.
But even now, the U.S. intelligence community said that they did not have a weapons program. But Trump wanted to do this, and as did Bibi Netanyahu want to do this.
And I have because you mentioned that, I have a question just on the same basis. Now, the agency, the Iranian Atomic Agency, has said that the development of nuclear industry will not be stopped despite the evil plots of its enemies. According to you, was this strike successful in its aim to stop, perhaps, or paralyze a nuclear ambition? And is Israel now content with it?
we need to wait till we find out tomorrow how much was actually destroyed. The U.S. is saying one thing, the Iranians are saying something very, very different. If it is, as the U.S. says, successful in totally obliterating the Fordo facility, it will set Iran back for a year or two, or even 3 or 4 years. However, it will almost certainly guarantee that Iran develops a bomb program and rushes as fast as they can to develop a nuclear bomb. That's in nobody's interest. I don't want to see that. If that happens, not only does that pose a threat to Israel, but then we'll see Saudi Arabia, United Emirates, Egypt, Turkey, all developing their own nuclear weapons. You look at a state like North Korea. North Korea was so much more backward than Iran. Their economy is minuscule compared to Iran's. Their nuclear scientists were much less capable than the Iranian nuclear scientists, and North Korea was able to develop a bomb. Iran will also be able to develop a bomb. And what the United States and Israel have done is almost certainly to guarantee that Iran takes that course, which will be a disaster for the world if that happens.
Absolutely. And this is seems to be, well, Israel did want, and even Trump did say that we don't want any nuclear weapons from in Iran's hand. I mean, it seems like this attack has not really done any good to that. It's almost has done damage to the whole idea. Then again, the question seems to be, is it possible to actually obliterate nuclear sites in Iran?
I think it's about to get real.
Based on what I know, it could be done, but you can't obliterate nuclear knowledge. You can't obliterate know-how. I mean, so they can set the Iranian program back for years, but in doing so, they give Iran greater incentive than ever to go forward with the nuclear program and developing a bomb, which now they weren't doing. I mean, that's why if Trump was honest and competent, then we could have achieved that goal without U.S. attacking. Iran desperately wanted a deal in which it was happy to give up its enriched uranium. It was going to ship out the 60% enriched uranium, the 20% enriched uranium, go down to a very limited amount, and then so that it could use for its nuclear energy program and then some of its research reactors. You know, it was willing to do that if Trump was willing to negotiate honestly. But as soon as he says zero enrichment, then that's not going to happen.
Well, of course, we'll have to see what kind of reaction we see from Iran. It doesn't seem though it's going to be any more. It's not going to be settled any sooner. And we've been seeing reactions from U.S. They've not really been happy, especially even the Americans for that matter. But of course, we'll have to see and wait and see what happens. But
and globally, the U.S. is going to be such a pariah now for this attack because the world population was opposed to this as well. And you'll see the global South, you'll see most of the world, except for that handful of Europeans who met in Canada last week with the U.S. and the Canadians. You know, they're the ones who are war hawks in this. But much of the rest of the world is strongly opposed to this. And the U.S., which is already in a morally weakened position, like the Israelis because of the slaughter in Gaza, and now this on top of it is only going to weaken the U.S. position in the world and any kind of role that it might have played.
All right. Well, there is so much to discuss. Unfortunately, we don't really have much time, but I really appreciate you coming on the broadcast and giving your insights on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And with that, we'll have to call a wrap to this bulletin, but don't go anywhere. News and updates continue on the other side of this short break. You're watching Beyond World is One. Stay tuned.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here in New York's
Yeah, guys, I think I'm ending right here. I appreciate y'all for joining me. Everybody that came in, you know, I really appreciate y'all coming, kicking it with me during this unfortunate, you know, day. I really appreciate y'all rocking with me. Y'all comments and y'all thoughts matter here, right? I appreciate everybody that subscribed to the channel. I appreciate everybody that hit the like button. So I've been live for over 2 hours. Yeah, I gotta take it in. Cause guess what? Tomorrow is gonna be more. So I will be back tomorrow. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, please consider subscribing to the channel. Cause as soon as something else come up, I'm going live again. So with that being said, I love and I appreciate y'all. This is the one and only Stock Sniper. Till the next one. Y'all have a great night or great morning or wherever you at. Be careful. Pay attention. Right? But I know a majority of y'all that's in this chat already know what's going on. So until the next one, I love and I appreciate y'all. Make sure y'all subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button before you leave out so we can get the notifications out. Right? More people need to find out what's going on. Right? And with your help, we can really alert everybody and get everybody educated and up to speed so they'll pay attention to what we already know about. So I appreciate everybody for coming in, rocking with me. Hit the subscribe button as you headed out. Y'all have a great night, a great morning. Till the next one, I'm out. Love and I appreciate y'all. I'm out. Good night, everybody.